Well, we hope everybody had a lovely weekend with this beautiful, cool air mass that has moved into the Northeast and Mid Atlantic states, and even down to me here in North Georgia, where it was 47 this morning. We've got some more nice weather. In fact, it's hard pressed to find out when we're going to even get the next chance of rain, certainly not for the work week. The tropics are waking up as the southwest Gulf of Mexico gets active, and who knows? We might have a hurricane in the Western Gulf in a couple of days. That's all ahead on this very exciting, very eventful Joe and Joe Weather Show podcast. And if you'd like to support the Joe and Joe Weather Show podcast, where it doesn't cost you anything, and you shop on Amazon, use the referral link at the top of the chat board or on the descriptor to this video. Go on Amazon, search for whatever it is you're buying, buy it, and Amazon throws us back some coin. So everybody's happy. And we appreciate very much your support because we like to eat too here on the Joe and Joe Weather Show podcast. So, 47 this morning, Joe. I was out with my orange sweatshirt. I'm wearing my Giants shirt in absolute shame tonight, but it's a lot better. It's a lot better looking than that darn new uniform that they were running around in.
Hey, at least they managed two field goals.
My God, so sad. So sad. So anyway, got a you know really cool air mass here. Now we're going to warm up this week, and it's going to get back into the 80s. That's no question. But the difference is that the dew points this week, all week long, are probably not going to get out of the 50s.
This morning here, you beat me by, I guess, a degree. I got down to 50. It may very well go down into the upper 40s here tonight, though, because we had a lovely clear sky coming up tonight and another very cool air mass settling in over our area. And then tomorrow, a pretty nice day, although there's going to be a bit of an interruption, probably due to an upper level disturbance, which we'll talk about. Might even throw a couple of showers our way late tomorrow or tomorrow night. No big deal. Nothing to write home about. But after we get past that, it looks like we're home free for the rest of the weekend, even on into next weekend. And you mentioned, Joe, the potential of a hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico, and the moisture from that system probably is going to adversely impact, it would appear, the Gulf coastal area and maybe into portions of the southern and central plains. But it looks like high pressure is going to be proving to be an effective block to keep any of that moisture out of our area here in the Northeast, at least through the end of the week and maybe through next weekend.
Yeah, it's a sprawling high. And I never like it when the GFS in the long range shows no rain for 16 days because you know it and I know it. We've. Can you remember the last time that you went 16 days without any rain?
No. In fact, I think that probably would be a record at Central Park, a stretch of 16 completely dry days. But, as I said, we may get a little bit of precip tomorrow night or late tomorrow and tomorrow night from disturbance moving to our north. Although, if it does happen, it may not happen at Central Park, but more likely to happen just north and west of New York City. And again, no big deal. Yesterday, we had a veritable downpour. In less than an hour's time, we picked up about 6/10 of an inch of rain locally here in Putnam Valley. It was coming down to beat the band, but once it ended, that was it. It was all over. And ever since, the cool, dry air has settled in. And again, a beautiful day out there today.
And here in North Georgia, it was a gorgeous day. Barely broke above 70 for a high this afternoon. There was a nice, cool northwest breeze. I mean, really was just, for me, I thought it was just exceptional. The kind of day it was. It was lovely. And I'm just outside that zone. Eventually, rain's going to get into me in one form or another later this week. But at least for tomorrow, and maybe for another day or so after that, things should still be relatively nice here because we're just sort of on the southern edge of that big high that's pressing down. Welcome to everybody tonight to the Joe and Joe Weather Show podcast. If you're on the chat board, big hellos and big hugs. If you're not on the chat board and you're working in the background, we give you big hugs too, and we encourage you to maybe become part of join in on the conversation that goes on during this show, which is Sunday through Thursday at 7:35 p.m. Just a quick heads up: Thursday this week will probably be a late start, either 8:30 or 8:45, depending on whether I'm ahead in the poker game or not. So I will the monthly poker game. So I will certainly let you know about that. Subscribe to my YouTube channel so you don't miss us, and make sure you turn your notifications on. And if you like the show, by all means, hit the like button. So let's take a look at this.
Is that poker game, by the way, going to have Oscar, Felix, and Murray the cop?
Um, well, in a sense, maybe because it's really all of us semi-retired or fully retired people, and we get together once a month with all our maladies, and you know, take away a few dollars from one person and give it to another. But
Yeah.
we all have our habits, I guess, that we discuss. But anyway, here's potential tropical cyclone 6, which the Hurricane Center designated that this afternoon, mainly because of the fact that they're getting winds of 55 to 60 miles an hour on the west side of this. And if you look at it, it's kind of stretched out north south. It's more along the lines of an elongated trough with a low centered in there somewhere. So we sort of have to wait for that low to just tighten up and a bit of a inner core to start to form before they'll designate it as a tropical storm. Now, all the models say that's going to happen. And from what I'm seeing here, I don't see any shear issues from how the clouds are behaving. You can see that the convection is, the cloud cover certainly is increasing. Let's put on, we're going to go to the lightning strikes. And there is a fair amount of convection with this in the Western Gulf. So I think it's just really a matter of time before we're going to wind up with a well-defined low center, and that's probably going to put the Texas coast at risk, particularly the coast to the north and southwest Louisiana, because this is going to be one of these things where it forms not too far offshore, Joe, but the way the upper air is and the steering winds are, it's probably going to curve more northeastward with time, and make a landfall somewhere. I'm going to guess somewhere in either the middle part of the Louisiana coast or the western part of the Louisiana coast, somewhere in there. Uh, by the time we get to late this week.
And have you come up with any kind of thought? We haven't talked to, for a few days or whatever, but now here we are with the possibility of this tropical disturbance in the Gulf of Mexico probably turning into a named storm in the next 24 to 48 hours. And that would be Francine. That would be the F storm.
Right.
But have you given any thought about what might be the final number in terms of tropical storm or hurricanes this season, considering that it has been so relatively quiet? And I know that the Hurricane Center is still banking on what, 17 to 24 storms, or
Right.
do
All
you
right.
think?
So here's what I think. I think the next couple of weeks are going to be obviously critical. Okay. You're going to have to put down five or six, at least a half a dozen named storms by the end of the month to have a chance to get to that 17 number. That 24 is good at this point.
I,
Having lost the last three. What's that?
I don't think it. I don't think we're going to be anywhere near
You know,
24.
I
In
think
fact,
the 17 is still possible. The 24 is. Listen, if we do wind up with 24, it's going to be an awfully busy. There's going to be a stretch of time in there where you're going to have a bunch of storms in a matter of a couple of weeks. So we better not go to 24.
I
But
think my number, if you had to hold me to a guess today on this 8th day of September, I think the final number of storms that we're going to see is, all things considered, that we haven't really seen all that much activity or abnormal activity to this moment in time. The number I'm suggesting is still a pretty good number, 15. So we right now we are working on, uh, we'll probably have storm number 6 coming up in the next day or two, and that would mean that another 9 would be heading our way between now, or Monday and Tuesday, and the end of the hurricane season. This whole
Well, look, you could do it like this. You could look at it like this. So this becomes a named storm. Tomorrow's the 10th. All right. So that leaves you with 20 days in September. You could easily get 3 or 4 more before the end of the month. You could easily get 4 in October, and maybe 1 or 2 in November. And that would, kind of get you close to your number. I don't think
I
it's
think I
impossible.
think I think November we may have at least one or maybe even a couple of tropical systems. So that would be the key to get that number up, as you just pointed out. But I
Yeah.
think we'll probably finish this season out with about 15 tropical named storms, either tropical storms or hurricanes. But I think 17 or even 23 or 24, as some forecasters have been suggesting, I think that's going to be out of reach. I don't
Well,
think
look,
that's.
at the end of the day, you know what? At the end of the day, Joe, the bigger question is it could be 15, it could be 25, it could be 8. Okay. If it's 8 storms and the next 3 named storms wind up being major hurricanes that make landfall in the United States and, you know, cause damage, um, whether they get to the top number, the mid, the bottom part of the range or the top part of the range won't matter. If we wind up with few landfalls and no major hurricanes, we could go up to 24, and you go up to 34 if you want. And in most people's minds, it would be considered an inactive season because we didn't get any landfall. So, it's
It's it's all, relative. Hey, look, 1992, the first tropical system of the season, didn't form and didn't develop until almost the very end of August, and that was the A storm. And OPS, that was also Hurricane Andrew, which cut like a buzzsaw across Florida and eventually made a second landfall in the Gulf, caused tremendous damage, fatalities, billions of dollars worth of damage, and that was it.
yeah,
All you need is just one. And the ironic thing was that up until Andrew had developed, people were saying, through June and July and through most of August, where are all the hurricanes? Where are all the tropical storms? Hey, maybe we'll get off this year with no problems. And then what happened? The very first one at the
right.
end of August turned out to be one of the most devastating of all time. So you're absolutely right.
Well, and the other question is we get when we get toward the end of hurricane season, we know what the final number is. If it does wind up being subnormal, then you have to ask yourself, well, is this another example? You and I have talked about this for the last couple of years, but particularly in the last year, about how uh, weird things have been happening and rules that we normally use to try to figure out what the medium range and the long range is going to be, uh, just haven't been working. Things, we've been seeing so many odd things, and does this go down as another one of these odd things that doesn't follow the rules, where you have um, a neutral situation in the Pacific regarding the La Nina or El Nino? Maybe you could say it's a weak at La Nina. Last year we had an active season that was above normal, in spite of the fact that we had a moderate El Nino that was in place as the season started. So there's always going to be debate, and there's always going to be a lot of questions in terms of how this all plays out. But at the end of the day, we're here to kind of just go through whatever's in front of us in the short range and figure out, maybe what it means for a week or 2 out, and just sit back and observe. I guess that's really the only way to put it.
Well, I saw an article, I think, online yesterday. I think it was on AOL, about how the fact that we don't or have not seen the type of activity in the tropics that was anticipated. I mean, again, we have been saying how um, this was because of the exceptionally warm water temperatures of the Atlantic Basin and the Caribbean, and also the La Nina that was anticipated, that this was going to be an exceptional. And now this so far has turned out to be anything but exceptional, at least up to this point in time. And the bottom line of it is that the experts who were questioned about this said it's all due to global warming. And when I looked at that, I shook my head for a second. I said, well, wait a minute. Hold on. I thought the fact that we were going to have all of these storms, so many of them this season, was due to global warming. And now they're saying that the lack of any significant storm activity is due to global warming. And I'm saying, is it possible? Can you have it both ways? I don't understand.
Well, I don't think. I think you can have it both ways. I just don't think that they have I just don't think that they have that they know enough about whatever is happening. There's so many things that are happening. There's been so many. There's the Tonga eruption, which I keep bringing up, which I think is a big player here in all the stuff that we've been seeing to kind of screw up the atmosphere. Um, 600% of normal rainfall in the Sahara Desert of all godforsaken places. There's just I think it's a learn as you go. They just try to figure all this out, and sometimes they think it's going to they you look at something and you say, okay, this is the way it should go, and then it winds up going completely in the opposite direction, and you spend more time trying to understand why. I just don't know that. I just don't. They just there is so for as much as we know, there is so much more we don't, and that about the atmosphere, about the universe, about life. That's just how it is.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the explanations was that that there's so much moisture in places that don't normally see that moisture. For example, in Africa, where parts of the Sahara are
Right.
getting moisture, and they're saying that well, it's too moist. That it's too. What was one of the forecasters, one of the experts saying it's too messy, the overall pattern in the tropics in terms of moisture, too messy to allow the development of what normally would be waves of low pressure evolving into tropical systems. So, but again, it's really crazy. Miss Spallery on the chat board, the volcano eruption. I guess she's making reference to Tonga, has
Right.
been not to not affected. Joe. Well, uh, I've recently seen something on that where they said that, I saw papers and research saying that the amount of water vapor that had been injected into the atmosphere by Tonga would play an influence for maybe as much as 6 to 8 years. And now I just recently saw a paper saying, nah, we've just about reached the limit.
Right,
We're
and
not
then there was something else I read too about the fact that the Tonga may have actually lowered the global temperature by 1 degree, and I asked myself, well, what was not clear because the article was written by you know, not someone that it was a reporter writing about an article. It wasn't,
right.
so you don't know what the person knows or doesn't know.
Yes.
But they didn't make clear was okay. So what does that mean? Does that mean that did they mean that it's actually 1 degree below? There was an actual 1 degree fall in global temperatures because that goes against everything else I've heard up until now. Or did they mean that well, the global temperature would have been 1 degree higher than it was actually reported had it not been for Tonga? So I'm not at all clear on this. The other thing that doesn't get mentioned very often that is, and which I think is a very interesting uh, development, is the fact that when you look at the number of hurricanes across all the basins, okay, all the basins, there has been a decline in every single basin of activity, with the exception of the Atlantic basin. The Atlantic basin is the only one that has um, shown an increase. The East Pacific basin has decreased. The Central Pacific basin has decreased. The Western Pacific basin has decreased. And that, by the way, could be one of the reasons why the winters haven't been that cool because, these recurving hurricanes that in the Western Pacific that wind up recurving east of Japan and going all the way up toward the Arctic play a really big role in the downstream weather pattern. We saw that in a big way back in 2014, the winter of 2014, 2015, which was I forgot the typhoon's name, but made a was recurved in January and recurved east of Japan, and it energized a deep upper low in the east the Bering Sea and the Aleutians, which created a big ridge in the west and a deep trough in the east that lasted for almost two plus months during the month from late January to early April. So, uh, you know, and I don't know that they understand that. You would think that that would increase hurricane activity in every basin, but apparently it hasn't. So, again, for as much as they know, Joe, there's a lot they don't know.
Well, that's I will agree with you. That's and of course the reason is that we don't have anything to fall back on. There are new things that are happening that we simply have never seen before, and as a result, we are just making educated guesses as to what may be the ultimate result or what may happen when such patterns repeat themselves. Again, we just don't have enough data to fall back on to get an idea as to what exactly will or has transpired.
Right. And they won't really come to an understanding of what it did or didn't do until after all of most of the effects of it have already played out. So we're going to have to kind of we're going to know in hindsight, which really doesn't do us any good. Uh, 10 years from now, they'll say, oh, okay, that eruption, this is the reason why we're seeing we saw what we saw. And we'll know about it 5 years after the fact. So, in the meantime, you and I will just continue to go with the flow, as they say,
Right.
with whatever is in front of us. And in front of everybody on the screen is the Hurricane Center's forecast for potential tropical cyclone 6, which they do strengthen to a hurricane. It's at 21. This is the 7 p.m. This is the new advisory, by the way, because we've been yapping so much. It's at 21.9 north, 94.7 west. It's far enough out in the Gulf of Mexico, even though it's close to the Mexican coast, but it's far enough offshore that it may stay over water for a fairly long period of time, certainly for the next 72 hours or so. So once you start to see an actual center form, this thing could wind up strengthening a lot faster than you think. If because the upper air conditions are favorable, there's hardly any shear. So, I don't know if the GFS was to be a little bit too aggressive with the whole idea of a on the 12Z run had a 957, Cat 3 going into southern Louisiana. I don't want to, given the time of year where we are in September, I don't want to say that that's wrong. Okay, it might seem to be a little bit of a stretch, but um, no, nothing. It's not impossible. This was the recon from earlier. Very interesting here that the pressures here are pretty low, Joe. They had two measurements. Actually, I'm sorry. This is the wind. They didn't have a pressure measurement. I take that back. These are the flight level winds. The the here's the This was a more recent one where they had winds up to over 55 knots for uh, and then we go back. In fact, I'll bring up the actual drawing of this darn thing, which is missing a satellite view. But you'll notice here the wind barbs. These red wind barbs here are 55 to 60 knots, and there's a few of them there. But also note that you've got um, uh, some northwest winds, like right near where there might be a center. They didn't plot a pressure there, but it's still most of this hardly the winds are very strong on the northwest side. They're strong on the southwest side. And the Hurricane Center did mention in their discussion that part of that may have to do with the fact of the air funneling down between where the trough is and the mountains in Mexico, just inland. So that might be causing the winds to be stronger than they otherwise would be. On the east side, in the southeast quadrant, you've got some 45 to 50 knot winds, But in the northeast quadrant, most of the winds are very light. So it's all stretched out. It's not really looking like a tropical storm yet, but it does seem to me like we're going to get there, and we'll take a look. Let's go back to the. Let's see if we can get under current storms. They don't have the plotting maps. They had the plotting maps when it was listed as a disturbance 91L, I think it was, but now that they switched over to potential tropical cyclone, they go to run. They have to rerun the models, so we won't have them in time for this show. But this was the GFS ensemble. I'm sorry, this is the GEPS. This is the Canadian ensembles, and the hurricane tracking models that I saw earlier today were not that far away from where the mean position is here. You can see it turns north and then north northeast, coming ashore in southwest Louisiana. This one was the furthest left of the bunch, and the GFS ensembles, the GEFs, is a little further to the east, a little more in the middle part of the state of Louisiana on the coast, and then going northeast up toward western Tennessee and western Kentucky. One thing's for sure, Joe. Uh, this is going to be definitely a west side of the Appalachians type track, no matter what we get. I mean, I don't know if it'll go all the way up or if it gets that close, but it's definitely going to be west. This is not going to be something that's going to make a turn across and go straight east through Alabama and Georgia, then off the southeast coast, as a couple of runs did back yesterday and the day before. I think this track does, makes a bit more sense to me than anything else that I've seen.
Right. This is not going to make any kind of. It's one of those unusual cases where if you lived, for example, I would suppose in Little Rock, Arkansas, or St. Louis, Missouri, your local weather forecasters will be talking about potential heavy rain coming from what ultimately will probably become Hurricane for once Hurricane Francine. This is something that we normally have to deal with here in the tri-state area. We've had storms that came up along or adjacent to the eastern seaboard that weakened and translated into extratropical storms, nor'easters or coastal systems that at one time were tropical systems. And we say, well, this rain is coming from the remnants of what was once tropical storm, whatever. That's not going to happen. In fact, as you can see on the map that Joe has up there from the GFS, as he points out, the track is going to be well west of the Appalachians. And so any kind of influence from this system, at least over the next 3 to 5 or 4 to 6 days in the tri state area, is going to be minimal at the very least. And with high pressure um, continuing to hold on in the Northeast and mid Atlantic, the worst we may see out of this will be perhaps some mid or high level clouds later in the week. But that's about all. It does not look like we're going to be seeing any kind of precipitation, as opposed to what, again, places inland from the Gulf of Mexico, like Little Rock and St. Louis, will see.
So let's look at this is the 18Z GFS with this. And by the time we get to, let me get the time and date on the screen so you can see that there. So this is actually Tuesday night. This is 1 a.m. Wednesday. The center is still east of Brownsville. And it's pretty wrapped up. I mean, it's in the 990s. I can't see what the lowest pressure is because they got red on red, so it's hard for me to read it. And then it goes northeast from there. I mean, it does. I'm going to try and give me 1 second here. That's a nine. That's a 966 pressure. That's on the coast in on the Louisiana coast, and this is Wednesday evening. And as we go forward, it takes the low northward um, into eastern Arkansas, goes west near Memphis into western Tennessee as it continues to weaken, and then just kind of can't get further north than that. And I think the reason for that is if we just widen this out a bit, we could look at the upper air, because obviously that's the player here in terms of the steering. You've got a big ridge. The westerlies are way up in northernmost Minnesota into Canada and also in New England. So it's basically got a big ridge that's building over the Great Lakes. There's a closed upper high there on Thursday, and it's just blocked from going northward. Even though there's a deep upper low that goes into the Rockies, that upper low is far enough west where it doesn't really pick it up. So the ridge just the upper high just keeps building Thursday and Friday and into Saturday. So it just sort of slides east southeastward back down into the Gulf states. So the remnants only get so far north, and then they sort of start to drop southward. Which I think, if you look at where the upper high is, that actually makes a lot of sense because there's nothing to lift it up to the north, lift it up northward. It's going to get only so far north and then come to a grinding halt.
Yeah, now nine. If you're thinking about it in terms of inches, 966 millibars is like 28.5 inches of mercury. That will not show up on most standard aneroid home weather stations or home barometers. It is very, very low. And of course, as we've been seeing on the chat board, some folks have been saying, some models have been saying 962. I see that Frank R said 957 on the GFS 12Z at landfall. I mean, this is going to be a very potent storm, which, regardless of the actual barometric pressure, it is going to be one that's very significant. And as Joe pointed out, who's to say that just before landfall there may be an unexpected increase in the sustained winds, because the waters usually right along the immediate Gulf Coast are abnormally warm, if not downright hot. And if you have a tropical system interact with that, who knows? It may. We saw that happen with Katrina, where I went to bed. It was like a Category 1. We woke up the next morning, it was Cat 4. Crazy things like this can happen whenever you deal with storms that are along the Gulf Coast or near the Gulf Coast, especially so since we are right now very close to the traditional peak of the hurricane season, which comes on the 10th of September, which PS will be on Tuesday.
And I'm just taking a look at the upper air here with this. I mean, there's not a whole lot of shear in the Gulf of Mexico, really. Most of the stronger upper air winds are on land across Texas. And, here we go. This is tonight. It's got an upper air anticyclone over it. So it's got a upper high at 200 millibars that's sitting right on top of it. All the strong westerlies are way up to the north, so it's in a favorable spot for development. And there's probably going to be, look, judging from this upper air showing the wind shear, that's probably going to be a decent amount of outflow here as it goes northward. So, the upper air conditions are conducive to tropical cyclone formation. Now, I noticed also, by the way, that the Hurricane Center. Let me see what they did. Excuse me. Just to mention this also, because we do have two other disturbances that they're watching now. There's one that's somewhere between right around 15 north and about 40-ish west, where they have a 60% probability of developing in the next 40 hours and a 70% probability over the next 7 days as it moves west-northwest. And then another one behind it at about 15 north and roughly 30 west. And they're saying, and there's environmental conditions after the next couple of days are expected to become favorable for gradual development. So we might have, it's one of these things, Joe, where we're sitting here for the last 3 weeks wondering there's nothing, nothing, nothing. And now, 3 days from now, 3 or 4 days from now, we could have three of them going at the same time.
Yes. And that's what I was talking about at the beginning of the show, that we could very well see an uptick in activity in the coming days and weeks, which, while not necessarily pushing us to above normal status, could get us close to near normal. And again, at 15, I think 15 tropical or 15 named storms is not totally out of the question.
All right, let's go back. We're gonna we get this map set up. This is the GFS, so let's just run through what's going on here. As far as watches and warnings are concerned, with all the cool air in the east, we actually have frost advisories up for the northwestern mountains of Virginia and eastern West Virginia into western Maryland. Otherwise, there are no watches and warnings anywhere east of the Rockies. The reds that you see off the Texas coast and down off the Mexican coast, those are tropical storm warnings that are up for the coastal waters. We don't have any watches yet up for the Texas coast. We still have some excessive heat warnings up for parts of Southern California, right along the coast, including LA and San Diego. Also in northern Nevada near Reno, where we've got a few counties up in north and south of Reno. But the widespread excessive heat and heat advisories that were up late last week have definitely eased a bit. And with that deep trough coming into the west, this heat wave in the west is going to completely go away once that trough gets established in the western part of the United States. So there's that. We don't have any of the flood watches or flash flood warnings. There's a minimal amount of weather going on in the U.S. at the moment. There's this kind of, I don't know if there's any, let me just check something here, Joe, because it's got that light whitish area that you see in Minnesota down into Wisconsin, Illinois, Missouri. That's moving southeastward. I wonder if that's. I don't see any air quality alerts, so I don't know if that's smoke or haze or whatever it is, but it shows up on the satellite. Otherwise, you can see the rotation of the upper low in eastern Canada. And Joe mentioned that trough that's going to be moving through tomorrow with showers and even some thunderstorms. SPC actually has a marginal risk up for parts of upstate New York, which we'll get to in a moment. Otherwise, most of the weather across the country today is fairly quiet. You've got some action in parts of North Florida, some clouds along the southeast coast. Of course, you've got the potential tropical cyclone, and you've got a few scattered thunderstorms up the central and northern Rockies and in the Wasatch Range, and back over parts of eastern Nevada and northern Arizona. And they show up with all those speckles there that you see on the radar out in the west. A lot of scattered stuff there. You've got a lot of downpours, some downpours in central Florida, from Tampa to the on the west coast to Daytona on the east coast. And of course, you can see everything that's out in the coastal waters, a little shower activity skimming the South and North Carolina coast, mostly on the light side. And uh, with that low that's in eastern Canada, you're seeing heavy rain there in the St. Lawrence Valley, and a few speckles of showers in north central New York, which were a little more numerous earlier, but they've kind of calmed down a bit. Storm Prediction Center, no organized severe weather tonight. And tomorrow, they've added a marginal risk for an area in central New York and in parts of western New York, Buffalo, Syracuse, Rochester, and then north on I-81 toward Watertown. So they've got a small area of marginal risk there. No elevated tornado risk indicated. And day three is still quiet from Maine down to Georgia and west into the middle Mississippi and Missouri River valleys. General storms in the Gulf Coast, general storms in the plains and in the Rockies. And as far as rainfall is concerned, next 7 days, WPC, they got that area, Joe, in western New York and central New York where they're showing a half to 3/4 of an inch. And that's all tomorrow with that little upper trough. But everywhere to the northeast of that and everywhere to the south of that, down into northern Virginia, it's basically a tenth of an inch or either a tenth of an inch or less or just nothing for the next 7 days.
Well, that'll be, we have, if you look at the fact that we may get a couple of showers here, as I mentioned, late tomorrow night, especially over areas north and west of New York City. That might be it for the next, for at least the next week, if not even longer. So, yeah, we're going to go into a nice protracted spell of dry weather. And we've certainly had more than our fair share this summer, especially during July and early August. But it's going to be nice to enjoy a period now where we don't have to worry too much about heavy downpours and thunderstorms or whatever. Nice little, quiet period, much deserved after, again, what we've been through over the course of what has turned out to be a rather wet and also a rather muggy summer of 2024.
The southeast, 3/4 of an inch to an inch and a half, some heavier precip offshore. And then you have in the central Gulf states, and particularly along the Gulf Coast, the orange area is 5 to 7 inches of rain from the coastal bend of Texas and southern Louisiana. Just draw a line maybe where I-10 is in southern Louisiana. So it's from there south that you've got this area of 5 to 7, and the it's up to several inches pushing up into northern Mississippi, up to an inch and a half into Tennessee and Kentucky, and that's between now and next Monday night. So overall, it's all about ridge in the east and soon to be ridge in the east and trough in the west. And of course, you've got this potential tropical cyclone here in the Gulf of Mexico. But other than what's going to be going on in the Gulf states, much of the rest of the country looks fairly dry this week. And here in the east, of course, with this high overhead going out and then just sort of hanging east of Cape Cod, and part of it builds back, it doesn't build back. Suddenly, the center jumps to Pennsylvania. Uh, the one thing for sure, because of the way how the upper air is structured, all the tropical moisture is going to stay south. So the dew points are going to have a real tough time coming up. So even though it will get very warm, even though we'll probably see temperatures reaching the 80s beginning as early as Tuesday and lasting through the rest of this week, and now I'm up to Saturday night here, and that high only strengthens even more. Um, the temperatures will get warm, but the humidity is going to be very, very slow to come up. We may not even see dew points near 60 until late in the weekend or maybe early next week. And now we've got this. Now, this is where the model gets silly. Okay, Joe, when you look at what it does with this cyclone, okay, this potential tropical cyclone, okay, we could kind of you could disagree with the specific points. Maybe it's a little bit to the west of here, or maybe it's a little bit to the east of here, but it only gets so far north because of that building ridge. The moisture gets shoved southeastward, uh, and into the southeast, which late this week, which I guess kind of makes sense if you're going to have an upper high building over the Great Lakes. It can't go north. And then all of a sudden, you got lower pressures off the southeast coast early next week, and the GFS decides, okay, well, let me spin up another low and another tropical system and bring it on shore somewhere on the Georgia coast or South Carolina coast, 8 days from now or 9 days from now. And we're still not seeing any rain here. Now, this is probably when, if this pattern plays out like this, maybe next week you start to see the dew points come up. But until then, I think it's going to be reasonably comfortable.
The fact of the matter is that we're going to be spoiled here in the tri-state area for much of this week with dew points in the 40s and 50s, so that by the time we get to, let's say, Friday and the weekend, next weekend, yeah, as you point out, Joe, the dew points may come up a little bit, but we're not talking about dew points of 70. We're not even talking about dew points of 65. We might be talking about dew points of 60 or 62, which is, right at the limit of what you would call muggy or slightly humid or whatever. And yet, even though it's not overly humid, it may actually feel more humid than it really is because of the fact that we've become acclimated or will become acclimated to the amazingly dry humidity levels, the low dew point levels that we're going to see for much of this week. So once it ekes up, let's say, to near or just above 60 Friday into the weekend, that combined with the fact that the temperatures are anticipated to climb maybe to the mid or even the upper 80s in some places by the end of the week or the upcoming weekend, it may actually feel, you
Yeah,
know,
I technically, yeah, you're correct, but you know,
I mean, it may
50s,
feel,
50s, some people complain no matter what,
yeah.
you know.
It, I'm just saying that,
Honey, guess what? I just walked on water, and your wife says, "Wow, you can't walk, you can't swim like normal people."
well, there you
It,
go.
it's that type of person. I get it. No, but I get it. Some people are going to say it feels sticky today, when in reality, dew points in the 50s and temperatures at 85 or 6 with a dew point of 55 or 56 is fine. You know, it's fine. It's not like if it was 61 or 2, I'd say okay, it'll be fine. Otherwise, I could just sit there and just yell at them for being big babies. Okay. Anyway, let's come back full screen and let's shall do a little Briller Jeopardy on this Sunday night.
And Izzy D, a while back on the chat board, was inquiring about why don't we get Craig Allen to come on Joe and Joe? And I will say this to you, Izzy, and to everybody else who may have asked that in the past or was wondering, well, how come Craig is not on News Radio 88 or 880 doesn't exist anymore? Why don't you guys invite him? And we have we more times than you can guess. And I, in fact, extended an invitation to Craig like a week after WCBS went off the air. I said, now if you'd like to come on and take questions from our audience. And he said, well, I got to think about it, or maybe sometime down the road. He keeps kicking the can down the road. So it's not like we haven't tried to get Craig on. It's just that he doesn't seem to have the gumption to come on. So Craig, if you're watching, you always have an open invitation to come on Joe and Joe. But if you don't feel like you want to do it, or you feel you want to wait a little while, that too. But again, to all of our viewers, we have tried to get Craig on. He is the Cal Ripken of local weathercasters, having been on WCBS radio for 43 years, of a streak that probably will never be matched anywhere. But again, we just have not been able to set a date or a time as to when he would come on. So I hope that answers all of your
Yeah,
questions.
Steve LaPointe, because CBS won't let him. CBS doesn't exist anymore. So
Right.
there's that. Okay. If he does decide to come on, we'll let you know.
Yep.
Okay, so Brother Jeopardy tonight, Joe, is the average highs in September in the following cities. And we will start with Philadelphia.
Philadelphia, I would
Wait a
say
minute. I'm sorry. Hold on. We did this.
we did this.
Yes, we did this last week.
Oh, well, I don't have
'Cause
any
I,
really.
oh, then I don't. Okay, so I was just looking at the old one. All right. All right. So then we'll just wait till tomorrow. Okay.
Okay.
The
All
Scott will
right.
usually send it one way or the other. So we're good. All right. So on that note, I think we can wrap it up for tonight. And just again, a reminder, if you'd like to support the Joe and Joe Weather Show podcast, where it doesn't cost you a dime, you shop on Amazon, just use the Amazon referral link. It's your starting point, and shop till you drop, and they'll throw us back some coin. It's not out of your pocket. They'll just do that because we sent you there. So it's on the top. Link is on the top of the chat board. It's also on the descriptor to this podcast, and we appreciate your support. And on that note, we'll see you tomorrow night at 7:35 p.m. Night night.
Good night, folks.